Hello, everyone. I'm Melory Johnson, 25-year beauty veteran, consultant, and strategist. Welcome to Pretty Equity, where we tackle the real issues facing beauty founders and investors and bring you the answers from the experts behind the deals. Before we get started, I just want to apologize in advance. If you hear any background noise, I will be trying to get rid of it as best as I can when I edit this. But we are installing a new AC unit. Yes, I know it's December. There shouldn't be. Why do I need AC in December? People, I live in South Florida. We always need AC. So we haven't had AC since Saturday night. This is it hasn't been fun, okay? So bear with me, please. Hopefully there won't be too much noise and it won't get too distracting, but I'm throwing it out there, so please bear with me. Anyway, let's carry on. When most people hear the word quality, they think about texture, packaging, or performance. But in manufacturing, quality is something very different. It's a system. It's a behavior, it's documentation, traceability, and consistency. Quality is the invisible infrastructure that protects every brand and every investment long before a product reaches a shelf. Joining me today to respond to it all is Matthew Bestercy, Principal Consultant at Bestech GMP Contracting. Matt has spent his 30-year career auditing manufacturers, rebuilding GMP systems, and uncovering the risks that can stop a launch, trigger a recall, or collapse a brand. Today, we're unpacking what quality really means and why investors and founders need to understand it before the first batch is ever made. Matt, I know that we've worked together before and that this isn't the first time we're having a conversation, but it is the first time we're actually going to chat like this. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we go any deeper, let's talk about what quality actually means. Because outside of the industry and those new to beauty, people often think quality is just how a product looks or feels. However, the reality is in manufacturing, quality is, as I said, a system. It's behaviors, documentation, controls, and consistency that protects consumers, brands, and investors. With that said, before I go ahead and ask you the first question, Matt, I want to pause here for a moment and define a few terms for the viewers who are new to contract manufacturing. You're going to hear us talk about GMP and CGMP. These terms, good manufacturing practices, and current good manufacturing practices, are terms that refer to the regulatory framework that governs how products are made, not just whether they pass a final test. GMP is about building quality into the process from the very beginning. Things like supplier qualification, incoming materials, in-process checks, documentation. So problems are prevented, not discovered after consumers complain. CGMP is an ongoing standard manufacturers are expected to meet through systems, controls, and behavior. And one more important point, not all contract manufacturers operate at a true CGMP level, even though unfortunately many will say that they do. With that context, Matt, for someone who has never stepped into a GMP facility, how would you explain what quality actually is? And what does it include that those new to beauty may not realize? Go ahead, Matt.
No, sure. I mean, quality with regard to manufacturing, and you skimmed over it there, is ensuring that products are consistently produced, controlled to quality standards. So you have some standard to achieve to. And that goal is to build quality into the product at every step, not just test it in at the end. That's the primary concept. Too many companies just do some final tests and they said, okay, it passed, then we got good quality. And we'll get into the problem of that behavior and those consequences in this talk. So simple example, the building quality in, you've got leaky containers, How do you find out? Because you've got a large number of customer complaints and you're getting returns back of these leaky containers. Building quality into this example would be like Melory suggested, like you were talking about supplier qualification. Make sure, the suppliers, aren't working out of their garage and they're making substandard containers and closures right up front before you even start to use them. So you do a qualification, which involves an audit and things like that. And then when you finally select that supplier, you have an incoming inspection process. So you open up the box that they sent and you look at those containers, you look at those closures and make sure that they fit properly and they seal properly and they have the right dimensions, etc. You don't have to do every single one. There are inspection techniques where you just grab a sample across the whole batch that you receive from them. And then finally, one of the other strategies is do in-process inspection, like you were mentioning, right on the line. So you fill the bottles and then you take a sampling and make sure that seal is good. So that would avoid a lot of problems. That simple example. Um, but these days in the cosmetic industry, I see it a lot, and I think you do too, is that they don't realize that they have laws and standards they have to adhere to, especially this good manufacturing practices, the GMPs. I have this book here. And Mallory, I noticed behind you, you have the same book. It's the smaller version, but these are the GMPs, part of, this has many GMPs, medical devices, et cetera, but it also has the ones that apply to the industry here that we're talking about. These are federal laws. The 21 CFR Part 210, 211 are the good manufacturing practices. The C in the CGMP means current. So you have to keep up on any kind of revisions that take place, et cetera, to the GMPs. Pharmaceutical manufacturers have been following these GMPs for years, eons. They make their drug products. They know this back and front. They know that the FDA expects you to know them completely. And I think cosmetic manufacturers that they start entering into the drug world when they start making a drug product. Drug product is a very definite definition. It has an active ingredient, and the definition is it's used to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease. So let's think about, SPFs, skin care. Those prevent skin cancer, right? So now you've maybe knowingly or unknowingly entered into the drug world, and now you have to adhere to all of those GMPs. And you know what? Even if you're not into the drug world, you're just making cosmetics without an active ingredient. These are great concepts, how to run your operation. It gives you good quality output. It makes you more efficient and makes you save money. You have less complaints. You have less recalls, things like that. So it's not a bad concept or set of rules to follow, even if you're just making cosmetics.
I mean, Matt, I obviously, how I feel about, quality when it comes to GMP and GMP facilities in general and adhering to these sets of standards. Because as you said, a lot of manufacturers of cosmetics don't realize, even though they should, that when they're manufacturing products like acne products, hair loss products, SPF, they're now being held to drug standards. Drug standards being here, where they're used to operating at this level, we hope. But, now they have to bring themselves up here. But even with the implementation of MOCRA, I think that they at least have to bring themselves to a higher standard than they were operating before. But let's talk a little bit about quality, QC, QA. So basically what you were saying is that people often think that quality is the same as quality control. In other words, someone checking the finished goods at the back end. Okay, so let's just look at these concepts. Quality control versus quality assurance. Because if that's the case, if they're thinking that, quality is just what you check at the back end, then what's a full quality system? So can you explain to the audience the difference between QC, QA and the full quality system?
Sure, sure. So QA, quality assurance, is more of a proactive, concept. It's process oriented. And QC is more reactive. It's product oriented. So the QA part, it focuses on prevention, preventing defects, and it establishes and maintains a robust quality system by doing that. Okay. QA is concerned how the product is made, how it's made, ensuring that all the processes along the way, all the procedures, all the documentation, and the people are compliant with the GMPs. This prevents errors before they happen, right? Um, QC is more reactive, right? It focuses on detecting the defects. Okay, you've already made the product, so it's detecting defects by doing tests and inspections of the product, and it's concerned only with the result. Okay. And it verifies that the materials, the in-process components, and the finished product meet the established quality specs and standards that you set up.
Okay, so it's
Uh,
pretty clear then, Matt, why those distinctions matter. Because, if you're looking at a full system, what you're basically saying is that you can't have one without the other because it doesn't make sense. So to distinguish between QA and QC and then build a system would probably be the only way to go. And I don't know if you want to react to that, but
I mean, that all GMP manufacturing firms have to have both. You know, it's not one or the other. If you had only QC, you'd be testing quality in, right?
mm.
So that's not what we're trying to do here. Um, so with the QA, I wanted to give some examples of QA processes, which help prevent the defects. It helps prevent the rejects. Is developing and enforcing the quality standards and procedures across the company. Internal auditing, so sort of self-auditing, checking yourself, checking your work, checking that you're following the procedures. External auditing, auditing your vendors, your suppliers of critical components. We talked about, the containers and the enclosures, even the active ingredients. You want to make sure, and even some of the raw materials. You want to make sure those are clean. These days, FDA has been very much on top of that. Raw materials have been tainted with things like methanol, which is wood alcohol. It's poisonous. And they've been enforcing this. They've been finding products that are tainted with ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze. That's poisonous. So, if you get them from substandard suppliers, a lot of times overseas, and you'll find these tainted materials there. If you don't look into it, they're going to end up in your product.
Yeah, I know, Matt, I mean, there's been a lot of, talk about heavy metals. And again, that's another thing that, you find, and it's not just about microbes. So there were a lot of times when we would have, when you and I worked together, where, we were just not, the company was just not vetting their vendors well enough. And what you basically would find is that those raw materials would come in, or the you know, containers, whatever components would come in. And, it's one thing to do microbial testing, check for microbes. But there are other issues. And like you said, it could include heavy metals, it could include poisons. And you just never know, especially if you're using a vendor for the first time. Or some manufacturers prefer that their customers supply their own raw material. And again, that's concerning because who knows where it was warehoused? Who knows where these things, I mean, what they're contaminated with.
Right, right.
But nonetheless, moving on, but staying on the theme of misconceptions.
Mhm.
In your experience, what is the biggest misunderstanding you see around quality, particularly when working with early stage brands or even contract manufacturers themselves? But before you answer that, Matt, just a quick note for viewers. Misunderstandings around quality aren't limited to startups. We see them across the industry, including within contract manufacturing, often driven by outdated assumptions or willful blind spots, which is one reason increased regulatory scrutiny and frameworks like FDA oversight and MOCRA matter. They force clearer accountability and reduce the gray areas that allow these misconceptions to persist. Sorry, Matt, carry on.
No, you're right. The general assumption that it kind of shocked me because I've been working in pharmaceuticals for my whole career, and then about 10 years ago, sort of stepped into the cosmetic slash over the counter, sunblock kind of companies. And there's a general assumption there that I found that these companies think that the GMPs are sort of GMP light for them, which is not. There's not two sets of GMPs. There's one set of GMPs, right? And whether you're a drug product manufacturer that's making a life-saving cancer treatment, or you're making sunblocks, you need to follow the same rules, and they're being the in all these companies, and you can look at it right online at the FDA website. They're being scrutinized just as heavily as a classic pharmaceutical firm. So that's one of the assumptions. Another one that I see with a very immature kind of quality organization is that they assume that quality is just a necessary evil instead of like a proactive tool to prevent failures, to prevent rejects. And it actually saves time and it builds profit if you look at it that way. You'll end up on the better side. Also, quality is viewed as sort of a documentation exercise and make sure that you complete the required paperwork. It's much deeper than that. FDA understands that. And those firms that live and apply these concepts, these quality concepts across the entire organization are setting themselves up for success, and they're avoiding the future, inevitable future pitfalls. The ones that sort of ignore it, skim over it, eventually it's going to get them when the FDA comes knocking. But that's what
No,
I see time and again.
yeah, no, absolutely. And again, there's a theme that seems to run across, all the conversations that, I'm having with experts, and that is that regulatory or anything to do with compliance and regulation is about risk management. That's all you're doing. You're mitigating risk. You're managing risk. So I want to talk a little bit about investor risk here. Um, and specifically, let's connect quality gaps to financial, operational, and reputational consequences. But starting with DD, let's look at due diligence. Matt, when you're evaluating a brand or a CMO meaning contract manufacturing organization, what are the first quality related questions you ask? The things that instantly reveal to you whether an operation is safe or risky.
Yeah, I think a few things you can look at. One being the customer complaints. We talked about that a little bit. They're required to track customer complaints. So ask for their list of customer complaints and start looking into them, at least over a period of a year. Get a good trend in front of you, and you might find some pretty major problems. That's one thing. Another thing is the water system. People don't think that's important, but most companies will have a purified water system that filters and cleans up the water before they use it in the product. This is usually the major component, the major ingredient in most products. And if it's not a component in the product, it cleans the equipment that touches the product. So it's very important to have a clean water system. What I typically do, and I'm actually doing now, I'm constantly doing this for different companies, is evaluating water system design. Right now, just got done with a due diligence on a company that makes some ingestibles. The first thing you should look at is whether the system is a recirculating loop. Okay, meaning the piping leaves the water system, leaves the filters and everything, and it sends it out to different use points where the manufacturing operation uses the water, and then it comes back and it gets recirculated through the filters, and it does it again constantly. That is the sign of a good water system. If I mean, if you want to, hold yourself to a decent standard, that's what you need to have. If you see a company that has a one-way water system, meaning it's just sending it out to the different use points one way, that is that's a bad design. Why is that? Because once you shut down the valve after you've used it, that that column of water is just stagnant. It stays stagnant. And microbial contamination grows at a exponential rate after 24 hours. That's the magic number where growth just skyrockets. So if you have like a standing column of water for longer than that, you're going to have contamination, and and that is a sign that you got to look for. They call that a dead leg for obvious reasons. It's just sitting there doing nothing. So that is a dead leg. And sometimes you just see this piping. They're using household piping for purified sanitary water. Okay. PVC, things like that you see in your bathroom. Um, in sanitary components, that means like the valves they use. There's certain sanitary valves you need to use, not a ball valve, one of these things, not one of those ones that you have outside on your sprinkler system. You need a sanitary valve. Why? Because those have nooks and crannies. The non-sanitary have nooks and crannies where that contamination can grow. And then you're asked to look at their sanitization schedule, meaning every so often and on a routine basis, they need to sanitize the system, basically send some bleach or a similar chemical through there and hold it in the system and clean it up on a regular basis. If you see them doing that only once a year or once every 6 months, that's sort of a red flag. And then also look at their water data. Hey, can I see your water data for the last 3 months? And look at it per their specifications. There's usually a special specification for water that it meets for micro. And you just compare to that and see what it looks like, if you see any trends. The thing is with the micro, it's tricky because it's not evenly distributed in the system. And a lot of times it's sort of, they call it a biofilm, sort of a little film on the piping in there. If you don't have a properly designed system or properly sanitized system, this film can grow, and then it sloughs off micro contamination like on an inconsistent basis. So every sample that they take is not necessarily going to be, representative of a clean system or not. It depends if, some micro had sloughed off the side of that piping. So frequent sampling, frequent sanitization, all that kind of thing needs to be done with that water system.
So Matt, basically what
Um,
you're
yeah,
saying is that the water system is going to be the very, very first thing you look at. Are we talking at the DD stage? If you go in and you're doing an audit, the very first thing you're going to want to look at is the audit. And again, I'm going to reiterate something that Matt touched on for the audience. People forget that water is an ingredient, and it's usually the first ingredient on the ingredient list. So remember that.
Hmm.
Not only is the water there to serve, other purposes, like Matt said, for cleaning perhaps, but it is an ingredient and it's coming from that same source. So, for everyone to just bear that in mind, when you start setting yourselves up, or if you're going into audit, yeah, a new manufacturer. So Matt, I want to pivot for a second and talk about consequences. Um,
Sure.
we've both seen brands blindsided by manufacturing failures, and I can certainly tell my fair share of horror stories. But for today's interview, could you share an example without naming a company where a lack of quality oversight caused some serious damage?
Sure. I have many examples. I'll just bring up a few that are related to what I've seen in this industry. But before I get going on that, I just want to talk a little bit about how the FDA operates with regard to their enforcement. Okay, so it usually starts with the GMP inspection. So you usually get those every 2 years. They're not always on time, so you got to be ready. Um, and that results in a report called the 483. That's just the form number, sort of like a W-2 form for the government. They got this 483 report. You have 15 days to respond to that and how you're going to correct those observations, right? And if they're not happy with that response, they'll issue you a warning letter. And it's exactly what it means. They're not happy. It's an inadequate response to the observations that they made, and the consequences out of the warning letter. If you don't start fixing things on a very rapid basis and completely, not just window dressing, they could come and seize your product. They could injunction through the courts to stop manufacturing until you fix things. They could penalize you, fine you. In some cases, this criminal prosecution, if people are hurt, especially, you know, I've seen that before too. People died from ingesting contaminated product, babies. Import alerts could happen as well. And then the other things that are outside of the FDA is your business and your reputation. It's visible to the public, posted on the FDA website. The media picks it up and they start, putting in the newspapers or on public, internet. Um, Customers learn about it, investors learn about it, competitors learn about it, right? And there goes your reputation.
Yeah.
There goes your business partner trust. We've seen it, right, in real life. Um, you'll get increased regulatory scrutiny. I don't like to, but I call it, you're in the FDA vice now, and it's not getting any looser. Okay, so you really need to step up when you're into this warning letter thing. It could prompt a recall, and that also has this reputational damage. And there's also sometimes legal liability, lawsuits.
Matt, I'm just going to pause here a second and just connect back to brands because this is where founders and investors often miss the downstream impact. I know that we've been talking about contract manufacturers and the 483, the warning letter. When a contract manufacturer receives the 483, or worse, the warning letter, as you explained, it's not just that the CMO is affected because a lot of people, they don't understand that when a CMO receives these, okay, so the CMO, you know what I mean? So the manufacturer got into trouble. Big deal. Well, like I said, let me tie this back to the brands. Brands are also affected. significantly. In other words, they can suddenly find themselves facing disasters like you had mentioned: halted production, delayed launches, forced recall, which can lead to retailer fallout, investor concern, and reputational damage. And even if the brand itself did nothing wrong. And because FDA enforcement is public, like you said, Matt, brands tied to those manufacturers often get caught in the spotlight, whether they're named directly or not. And this is why quality oversight isn't just a manufacturer or a manufacturing issue, it's a brand risk and an investor risk. So just throwing that out
Yeah,
there.
very
Matt, I
important.
don't know if you want to react to that.
No, a very important point. FDA looks at it as the brand is responsible for their contract manufacturers. They're a branch of your company. So you will get it too, you know. So that's the way they look at it. No doubt about it. Meaning, you're not following the GMPs either. You don't have control of your supplier quality. You know, you're supposed to be auditing your suppliers. You're supposed to be stepping into that CMO and giving them a detailed audit because they're representing you, and all these things that we just discussed could happen to you. So, and they do see it a lot. So it's these examples. I'll give you a couple here. Um, First one was a happy ending, but it was a very large cosmetic manufacturer about 10 years ago. They didn't have process validation. They just stepped into, this is when the FDA started really uh, coming down on SPF manufacturers. And, fortunately, the brand was so big, and fortunately, they reacted very quickly and they saw it as a very serious thing. They brought us in as consultants to resolve the issues, and ultimately the impact was minimal. They took it very seriously. We had a team, internal team, as well as us, and we helped them get through it. Not always working out that way. Uh, Back only 2 years ago, we had an OTC drug manufacturer making a massive volume of various topical creams, lotions, and even oral products, including pediatric oral products, newborn formulations. They were mixing them all in similar tanks, maybe the same tanks. Um, and the FDA came in early 2023 and the volume dropped off considerably after they got a warning letter. And that was issued in mid 2024. They were inspected right after the warning letter, and the problem still existed. FDA suggested a recall. When they say recommend or suggested, it means you better recall, because they can make your
They
life
don't make
miserable.
suggestions.
Yes, yeah, but they always say it's a recommendation, but
Yeah,
it's
we recommend it. It's a guy. It's
yeah,
a guy. We're guiding you, but
yeah, no,
but you
no,
you
they're
had
not.
yeah, but you
Yeah.
had better. Yeah, you'd better
So,
do it.
yeah, so
Yeah. I
this was for
mean,
microbial. That one was for microbial contamination. The FDA found issues with the water system, right? They found problems with lubricants contaminating the batch. So they have these big overhead mixers in the tank, and they're using industrial lubricants that eventually can enter into the product. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
There are lubricants that are like food grade. So, things like that need to be looked into. There were odor complaints from the field. They were not testing raw materials for these high risk chemicals that we talked about earlier. So that was one. And then finally, I had another one um, just last year. They were CMO of sunblocks, acne, other topical products with active ingredients. Um, the volume was heavy and it was climbing. That place was really humming. Then the FDA came in and inspected them. And they didn't take the inspection observations seriously in their response. They were handed a warning letter, and that left, the customers were leaving them in droves. The company was searching for new business desperately. They spent serious dollars in repairing the quality problems, and they're still not out of the woods. They
It's
had problems.
amazing, Matt, that you say that because I don't think people realize there are some consequences you can recover from, and there are others that you absolutely can't. You know what I mean? It's just the disaster is so big that you just companies, brands find that they just can't recover. But talking about red flags and talking about risk. When you walk into a CM facility, what are the quickest signs? And I know we've talked about water systems, so beyond water systems, the quickest signs that a manufacturer might be cutting corners. So let's talk about things like training, sanitation, documentation, something, change control. And very quickly for new to beauty viewers, change control is how GMP facilities evaluate and approve the changes before they happen. So small tweaks don't turn into big problems down the line. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, usually change control means, you're doing something to improve something or you're reacting to an event. Okay. Um, yeah, I remember when I was back in big pharma, I mean, we had a tablet dryer. It seemed like a simple change. The motor that blows the air across the tablet tray gave out, and they wanted to replace it with a similar motor. Okay, and it sounded great and everything, but they failed to test the motor before putting the equipment back into operation, and it was actually blowing backwards. So it was taking, drug product impregnated um, that were impregnated on the vent and blowing it across tablets that were different drug products. So then we had a contamination issue. This something like a simple change turned into a big fiasco. So you have to look at changes very carefully. Um, that's one thing, and when I go into the facilities, I really look for just simple, common sense, sights, sounds, smells, right? Sights. What would you look for? Look for general filth, dirt, right? Unkept floors, chipped paint on the floors. All this stuff ends up in product eventually. Evidence of pest infiltration. I look at the walls. Some companies have pipes coming through walls from the outside, and there's big gaps. Lots of critters can come in that way, right? Ceilings might be stained. What does that mean? That means you have a leak on the roof that's getting in the facility eventually, right? Um, just practices, unlabeled drums, wooden pallets, and in the production area, wood retains moisture and then it becomes mold, right? Open buckets of material, broken down, non-functioning equipment, leaks, general clutter, disorganization. These are sort of red flags, right? Um, Sounds, look for unattended alarms. And this alarm might be going on for days, weeks. People are just ignoring it. That's a red flag. What does that mean? You know, Squeaky sounding equipment, meaning they're not attending to regular maintenance schedules, right? Smells. Keep aware of standing water. Standing water eventually becomes mold, mildew. Wet cardboard, same thing, and wood, right? Look for the facility and equipment condition. FDA does this. They're looking for filth. They're looking for rust on the tanks, things like that. Chipping paint. Chipping paint above the tank, anything above the tank is eventually going to flake off and get into the product, right? And then the water system, we talked about that. Um, those are generally what I'm looking for each time I go in. Those are the
Matt,
ones.
I mean, it's little wonder I hop on about the importance of choosing the right CM. But that's a conversation we can have on another day if you want to do this with me again. But in the meantime, let's delve a little deeper into GMP compliance and help investors understand the difference between real compliance and performative compliance. So for investors who are not technical, How would you explain what terms and acronyms like SOPs, batch records, traceability, kappa, and internal audits are? Because these are things that they're going to see and hear, um, and they don't understand why they matter or why these systems are in place or are so foundational.
Yeah, it's all about consistency. You need to have these systems in place. You need to build quality in. I remember reading, when McDonald's, for instance, started establishing themselves and really taking off in the industry. Somebody had mapped out the processes of making French fries, making the burgers, and things like that. And then they put these into standard operating procedures, SOPs. And that's why you could go to a McDonald's in Lower Manhattan and then out in Iowa the next day, and you'll get the same product because it's consistent, right? And that's what we're looking for in this industry, and that's what the FDA expects you to do, right? Um, and they break it down into six systems, they call it, the FDA. You got your production system, right? Your quality system, your lab, which is more or less QC, right? Your material system, your facilities and equipment, and finally your packaging and labeling. A lot of SOPs are associated with each one of those systems. Um, for example, the production system. Let me just go through the typical SOPs you would expect in production, right? You'd have equipment cleaning and sanitization SOP. You have a line clearance and cleaning SOP. What does that mean? You got to clear the line of all the previous product before you start the next product. This could be another customer of the CMO that's going to get mixed up with your product. You wouldn't want that, right? So you need clearing, you need cleaning procedures, you need validation procedures. I'm not going to get too heavily into that, but that's like testing your equipment and make sure that it functions properly before you put it on the line making real product, right? Master batch records. That's your recipe into making the product. You know, how much of this, how much of that goes into the tank, what speed you run it at, what temperatures, how fast do you fill it? That's all in your master batch records. People, gowning, hygiene procedures, right? Pre-weigh procedures. You got to pre-weigh your components before you put it into the tank, right? In-process inspection. What are you doing to inspect the product at various stages? Um, use and cleaning and maintenance logs, those sorts of things. So it's a regulatory requirement to follow all your established procedures. You could be written up on that if you don't. And FDA loves to use that slogan: if it's not documented, it's not done. Okay,
Right
so
on. Right
whatever
on,
you
Matt.
do, you need to document it, sign off on it as you do it, not later, not at the end of the day, as you perform the task. Okay, that's called contemporaneous recording of data. And they're enforcing that as well. So, yeah, that's essentially, the outline of how, the GMP concepts live in the real world.
Matt, I can't emphasize enough to viewers that line that you said, if it's not documented, it's not done. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. Because in my view, that needs to become a mantra for all companies and embedded into the company culture. So talking of which, you've worked with both proactive and reactive quality cultures. So, from your point of view, how can an investor or founder tell which one they're dealing with when they're choosing a CM?
Yeah, I'd like to put it out in a couple of points. You have the reactive culture and how do they operate? You have failed test results over and over again on raw materials, on finished products. You got a major trend of that. There's a problem there. They're just reacting, right, to test results. They're testing quality in, right? Um, the customer complaint list, right? They have to investigate and find out the root cause so it doesn't happen again. But if they don't investigate, if they don't find the root cause, it's going to happen over and over and over. You're going to get those boxes of returns. bring it into the facility, and you have to react to all that. You can really, be more proactive and increase inspections on your line and product quality up front through the suppliers, and you could avoid all that, right? Uh, Reactive cultures also result in equipment repairs, many equipment repairs, downtime on your lines. So you're expecting to make X number of goods each week, and you can only make a lot less than that because you have unexpected repairs. You don't have preventative maintenance, you have reactive maintenance, right? It breaks and you react. So that's what a reactive culture is. A proactive, you would have strong internal auditing. You would have, check yourself. Different people from different departments will come in and have a checklist and go through and inspect if you're following procedures, if you're having a trend of rejects, things like that. They will look for cleanliness, they'll look for sights, sounds, smells, right? Um, In-process inspection, we talked about that. Have a good, robust in-process inspection program. You don't have to inspect every unit. There are standards you use to just grab a sample, and that will represent statistically the whole lot, right? If proactive, also, you can see a lot of corrective action, preventative actions. They call them CAPAs. If you see a large amount of those, that's usually a good indicator that the company's always trying to improve, and they're addressing and closing these things on a timely basis. And then also, if this organization, this CMO represents larger companies, they tend to these larger companies have a really good quality staff. They'll come in, they'll externally audit the CMO. And that's important for due diligence and ongoing compliance. So that's what I'm
Okay.
thinking as far as
Okay.
culture, reactive, proactive.
Well, you know what? I mean, everything that you've just mentioned here it's so important for anyone new to this to understand. And, I want to just take another quick pause here before we carry on, and translate why this distinction matters so much, the proactive versus reactive, especially for investors and founders. A reactive quality culture, as Matt said, doesn't just create more test failures or customer complaints. It creates unpredictability. And unpredictability, to Matt's point, is expensive. It can lead to delayed launches, recalls, strained retailer relationships, regulatory scrutiny, and of course, lost investor confidence. Proactive, on the other hand, is a culture of prevention. So problems are fixed internally, they're fixed early, they're documented properly before they reach consumers, regulators, or the market. So, from an
Yeah,
investor perspective, this isn't about good quality versus bad quality or about whether a business can scale without blowing up operationally. I mean, Matt, do you think that what I've just said is fair?
yeah, of course. You can almost spot it if you had to, really pay attention to reactive culture. We had one client that had a micro contamination. Instead of looking into the water, instead of looking into the component, you know what they did? They put UV lights on the filling line, and they thought that would prevent contamination of the product. So it was just some general concept. Someone thought at a meeting, oh, we'll do that. And, they got all sorts of awards and accolades for doing that. But the product kept coming in contaminated.
There's
So,
nothing I love more than failing upwards.
right, exactly.
Oh no, but I mean I mean those are great points and great examples. And talking of patterns of failure, let's talk a bit about you know, you've often brought in I mean, you, Matt, and your company are often brought in to fix a facility's quality problems, which is actually how we met, but I digress. So when you were brought in under those circumstances, where do you first look And let's talk about trends. I know we've spoken about water systems and we've spoken about all the things that you look for when first go into a facility. But are there issues that tend, we're talking patterns and trends here. Are there issues that show up over and over and over again?
Yeah, I would look. I think that a simple few that can give you a good idea of what a bad pattern is. I would say anywhere in the process where the raw materials and the product and the primary closures and containers are exposed to the open environment, right? That could happen when you're sampling raw material, you're opening the material drum, and you're taking a sample, something could get in there, right? When you're weighing the material, you have to take out parts of the material to set up the batch, to weigh it for proper componentry. During compounding, which means the mixing process, and then during filling. These are the locations where the environment could contribute particulates, micro-contamination, things like that. And then you should look at the out of specification results, OOSs, they call them. So most of these companies will have their own laboratory and they're testing the products and they need to report anything that was out of spec, right? Or they use a third-party lab and the third-party lab sends them the test results. I would review that and look for a pattern of OOS, and usually you can pick that up. Sometimes it's just one single product that's tend to be, a big contaminator. Sometimes it's low on preservatives or it's the way that the process works. You'll get many OOSs. Look for the results in the water system. That at the same time, they also test the water, just like they would a product. They send it to a third-party lab or they're tested in-house. Look for failures in that, okay? And usually that's micro. Uh, some things can be covered up or not reported. You may ask, hey, can I see your OOS log? Oh, we have no out of specs. We've never had an OOS. I'm like, that makes you go, right? So watch out for that too. And always look at the raw data. Don't look at some Excel spreadsheet that someone came up with and say, yeah, here's our results. Ask for the raw data, meaning the actual certificate from the laboratory, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would give you a good idea of a pattern.
Okay. Okay. I mean, this is all this is all great advice, and this is all, exactly why we're having this conversation. This is all the information that anyone new, or even people who are not new to beauty, should be aware of and should know, because not everybody is going to know what happens behind the scenes at any manufacturing facility. But before we wrap up, if you could give, this is for investors. If you could give one piece of advice before any investor backs a brand that heavily relies on a contract manufacturer, just one piece of advice you would throw out to them now.
Um, yeah, maybe two.
Okay.
We make sure you have a strong QA organization in this company that you're looking at. Make sure they keep up with the external audits, um, and make sure they have a good internal QA staff. A lot of times, the owner company will really have their fingers in the CMO. So they'll review and release every single batch, meaning, batch packet full of paperwork and the recipe and the test results. They will look at each and every batch that the CMO generates and they'll approve it. They'll approve all deviations that happen, during the batch. Um, Sometimes they'll even come in and witness the batch being made. If it's a critical batch, if it's the first two or three batches, they will witness it. So it's not a hands-off thing totally. I would suggest getting in there and keeping an eye and continuing to keep an eye on the CMO. Also look for, as an owner, lack of responsiveness from the CMO. So you request some data, you'll request audit follow-ups. Hey, what's going on with the audit results that we gave you this observation or that observation? Are you working on it? Please give us an update. That's a red flag if they're not responding timely, or they're just putting together something very weak. You can tell right away that, an unorganized or small QA organization will be like that. They're understaffed. They're spending too much time putting out fires. Um, those are, takeaways. Those couple of things, I think, would tell you a lot.
And from a founder standpoint, in terms of strengthening their quality foundation, even if they're small or pre-launch, is there anything that you would, advice that you would throw out to a founder?
Well, I mean, do your due diligence, right? Execute the due diligence. You know, make sure that they have, we went over this, the internal audits, they qualify their vendors, they adhere to the GMPs, right? They're technically capable of making your product. Some companies claim, oh yeah, we got that tank, we can do that. And then they devise some kind of wacky process, which really is not meant for, making your product. Make sure they do have a quality culture, they have a quality organization, they have a training program, they manage deviations, they investigate and find root causes, they qualify their suppliers. And of course, do they have the capacity to make the volumes that you're looking at? Typically, part of that due diligence, you'd have to have some level of expertise or knowledge on that team for the due diligence. Uh, I would start with the quality agreement between yourself and the CMO, and that'll define the responsibilities of them and your responsibilities. We talked about product release. What is product release, and what's your involvement to it? I would say, a strong quality agreement would say the owner's quality unit has the authority for final product release, reviewing all those batch records and test results, right? Change control, we talked about that. The owner's involved with change control, and they need to approve all changes. Changes is not just equipment, it could be the raw materials that are coming in. They have a problem with a vendor, the vendor's not able to supply amount of raw material you need, they go to another one. That could be a very, very bad, supplier that they will have to be qualified. That's a change. So, and it involves testing of the material as well. Um, the owner's involved. This is all under the quality agreement. The owner's involved in deviation investigations. They're involved with auditing and inspection, reinspection. They are aware of any FDA or regulatory inspection results as they happen. So if they get a warning letter, they get a big 483 form, you need to, require them in the quality agreement to be contacted immediately. Okay. Make sure they have lab controls in place. They retain samples in case there's a problem in the field, that small amounts of each batch are retained in their facility for investigation purposes. So that would be the quality agreement. And then ongoing control, is again, just making sure all that stuff is in place on a regular basis. The batch record reviews, the testing reviews, reviewing of all the test results. That's the bottom line, right? At the end. And like I said, on-site presence for critical batches, and maybe randomly, looking at batches. Make sure they have other things in place, um, and you could look at their performance in a nutshell, sort of a quality council meeting. I've seen CMOs and their owners have regular meetings, maybe quarterly or twice a year, where they look at key performance indicators. It's sort of a scorecard for their performance. What do you look at? You would look at the number of deviations per batch. That would tell you, okay, are they are they making mistakes over and over and over, or are they getting better, right? Look at, timeliness of corrective actions, um, right first time on completion rate, number of OOS results per, a lot of times it's a ratio, how many out of specs per batch, and look at that. That could give you an idea of where things are going. Um, Periodic audits, these are all the ongoing monitoring. And then, like I said, a real proactive owner would have regular meetings to look at this data and ensure that they're on track. There's been no changes in the organization. There've been no, bad things going on.
So Matt, would it be fair to say that, for any founder looking at a CM, partnership is the most important thing there. Once they've decided to choose the CM, and writing up contracts is a conversation you and I can have on another day, because
Yeah.
what needs to go into a contract is that's another whole hour's conversation.
Yes.
But I'm going to leave it that,
Important. Yeah.
that founders just be aware that your relationship with your manufacturer is a partnership. It's a relationship that needs to be nurtured, and that you need to be involved and hands-on with. Because quality isn't a test, it's a system. It should be the backbone of every credible beauty brand and the safeguard for every investor putting capital into the space. So, with those final words, Matt, thank you for showing us what quality truly looks like inside a manufacturing environment, and why it matters long before consumers ever touch the final product. And for those watching or listening, if this episode opened your eyes to the hidden risks and opportunities behind beauty operations, follow me on LinkedIn, subscribe here on YouTube for more expert insights on the issues and answers that drive smarter beauty investment. I'm Melory Johnson. See you next time.